Welcome everyone to our webinar today titled Leveraging Collections Management Systems for Optimal Benefits. I'm very excited to have you here today because we are going to learn this topic together. My name is Manuel. I'm the Business Development Team Leader here at Lucidia. I will also be moderating the webinar and your question today. Before we begin, I would like to go over some few housekeeping items. Number one, to ensure that we get as much value with this webinar in the short amount of time, our lines are muted at this moment. Number two, we encourage you to ask question on our question and answer widget. So basically type your questions so that we can address them later on. And lastly, for those of you who want to revisit this webinar is recorded and it will be posted on our website at lucidia.com. Speaking of Lucidia, at Lucidia, our company, we work with museums, archives, and library and other information professionals to provide better access and visibility to their collections. We focus on bringing you the best solutions from around the world, but we are comprised of a series of products and companies that have joined Lucidia over the last 30 years. These brands include well-known products such as Argus, Sydney in Magic, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadrastar. Joining us today is an entrepreneur and an amazing information strategist. When I say amazing, I mean it, because what's special about her is that she has over 20 years of experience in information work in the national and international sector. She is an author, a certified archivist, certified records manager, and this is just to name a few of her roles and credentials. She believes in a bespoke approach to every project she works on. Today, she will be sharing her knowledge and experience on leveraging collections management systems for optimal benefits. Let's welcome Margot Note. It's good to have you here, Margot, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So this is kind of exciting for me because I've been creating this series of webinars, and this is the last one that we have together about collections management systems. And I think this is where we can get really creative about using these systems, because it's not just you're managing your collections, right? It's pretty straightforward, but the purpose that we're trying to the purpose behind why we're trying to better manage our collections is that once that management is streamlined and those processes are in place, we can really build and leverage all our archival collections to be even more powerful, to be more helpful to our users. And so I'm going to talk about today about how you can use your specific collection management systems to do just that. So you have this system and you want to maximize its value. It's been an investment of your time and expertise and money and labor, and we have it working now. It's been implemented. So what do we do next? A good collections management system makes discovery easier. People can find your collections more easier. And you have this kind of great problem to have is that your research expectations increase, that people want more access to the materials. There's more engagement in your materials, more questions. And then you're going to have to alter your practices to meet those user needs. And that's what's kind of exciting, is because when things are more easier to find, people are going to reach out to you more, and that might help you really maximize how you serve your users. So a collection management system allows you to analyze the data that you have. It offers a lot of powerful tools. So some of the questions that you might ask are, which collections are most used? And you might actually be surprised, because maybe something that you find that you get a lot of questions about, or something that's particularly interesting to you, there might be other collections that you have that for whatever reason people are really wild about, and they're accessing and they're looking into, and you might not even be aware of it. So analyzing the data really gets you deep inside, what collections are being most used and what parts of the collections, what series or sub-series have a lot of interest by your users. And then you can start thinking about, could these collections be better described? So of course, when processing a collection, I mean, depending on your practices within your organization, I imagine you're doing some type of baseline description and processing. But there might be parts of the collection that deserve more care and attention and description. So are there parts of the collection that could be better described? And then thinking about how can we reach wider audiences with our collections? Is there a way to tap into that data to see what people are looking for or what's particularly interesting to them? Because you can imagine if, if you're seeing in the data that something has some interest, if you make it more easier to find, I imagine you get more interest as well. So you're using metrics, so you're seeing what users are searching for. So I think you should also be thinking about what search terms or phrases people are using and what they're finding. And is there a way, for example, that your collections are described in one way, and they might be, be using data standards and ways of doing things that are best practices, right, from an archival standpoint. But are your users searching for it using different terminology? And how can you link those together better? I think you'd be surprised by usage findings. I mean, I think that's the power of data, that you can really see what you're looking at. You can also use those usage findings, especially if you see a lot of usage, to use that to advocate for people within your organization in leadership positions that need to know about how important and valuable your archives are. So the metrics are really powerful because, again, you can speak to the power of archives and the value of archives, and I mean, in kind of very eloquent but subjective ways. But I think the data doesn't lie. So these metrics can be used to advocate for what you want within the organization. And the metrics can be used to reevaluate processing priorities. So you might see several themes within your usage statistics that people are looking at subjects or themes across various collections. So perhaps okay, there's a research interest in this particular topic. Why don't we process these materials more deeply? And then you can also highlight the most accessed collection areas. So you can see, okay, there's a lot of usage or a lot of finding, access of the finding aid of this particular collection. Why don't we create something out of this? Why don't we make like a exhibition online, or why don't we do deeper description, or maybe this is something that we can highlight as part of our newsletter or on social media. So you're just getting this information, and it gives you kind of real-time use metrics, which I think is incredibly helpful. Because I think, especially as archivists, we're in, we can sometimes be in our own world of processing and in the archives world, but we don't really have that direct feedback about how collections are actually being used. And this is where collections management systems can really help us to get those metrics. And part of that is, once you know what's being used, how can you do deeper description? So thinking about user responsive description levels. So what is something that people are accessing? How can you describe it better? How can you describe it more in their terminology so they can find it better? And then you can start to inventory things at a more granular level. So let's say you have a collection that's maybe just done at the box level, and you see that there's interest in it. You might decide, okay, in this part of the collection, this series or subseries, let's go to folder level. You might even find, and this is quite unusual, that a part of your collection is so popular that you might want to highlight certain items within your collection. So you're doing item level description. Now, that's not really archival best practices for everything, but if you find through the metrics that you're tapping into that something really deserves a more item level description, you can justify that increased labor for those materials, and those might be the highlights of the collection that you want to bring to a bigger audience. And then, of course, as you do deeper description, you can publish that updated finding aid as people find the collections. It's also helpful too, I think, if you just do very baseline processing, like just enough processing to get that collection accessible to people. If you get user interest, you might decide, okay, I'm seeing enough people look at this very baseline, barely described, barely processed collection. Then you can justify maybe hiring a part-time person or using someone's part of their full-time schedule to process that collection more deeply, because you have that immediate feedback that even though this process is, barely processed, we're getting a lot of interest. So it's almost like just-in-time processing. There's also a way to do interpretation of collections. Now, archivists have this idea that we're neutral, right? And I think at this point in the field and the profession, we realize archivists aren't neutral because we're people and we have biases, right? So I think we have to step a little bit away from just being a purely neutral presenter of information. I mean, yes, in an ideal world, we could do that and the users could use our materials, but if we do see that there's interest in particular parts of the collection, we can start interpreting the collection more, almost in the way that like museums curate a collection and they use description and they arrange things, let's say on a web presentation, that tells the story of the collection more deeply. So you can wrap layers of interpretation around items or collections. So you're not just purely presenting this document or this folder in a very neutral format. You can perhaps, if there's enough interest, you can really describe the collection more deeply. And you allow users to grasp the significance of the collections. They might think, okay, this is an important document, but they might not have the knowledge to understand, okay, why is this collection being saved? Why is this particular group of documents really important? So we can use our expertise to really describe that much deeper, and really taking a page from, I think, a museum world that does this very well. You can also get very creative. So you can think about a highlights tour, and that could be defined by your audiences or categories. Maybe you have specific themes. So let's say you have in your collections, multiple collections of people that are writing about prison reform. Now, in the traditional archival point of view, we we think about provenance, we think about original order. We would never group together collections by theme, certainly not physically. But in the online world, we can create this kind of curated view of particular themes like prison reform and show pieces of the collection and maybe how these different collections and these people that created the collections talk to each other about this specific subject. I think it's a really interesting way to do some of that interpretation for your users and to get them more interested in the collections and different ways to access the collections and the context of the collections. You can also think about audiences. So are you specifically reaching out to high school aged students, or do you have more lifelong learning people? Do you have specific researchers, academic researchers? Do you have people that are more looking for aesthetics or visuals? So you can really define that highlights tour in a way that you think will best serve people, and also to reach out to people that you want to talk to. And this is where I think images are very powerful. A lot of archives, of course, are text-based, and there's something I think beautiful about a particular text-based document, like the way that like a typewriter looks, how things are formatted, handwriting, the age of the paper, or digital documents, how maybe an emulated screen look like decades ago. But images are super powerful, and you can kind of create how you want the display to look like. So you could have individual images, you can have a slideshow. So that's nice if you want to tell a story where there's a sequencing of images to tell that story. There might be a light box type of view, or clickable thumbnails. It really is dependent on the way that you want to present the information. And of course, the text amount and style varies. So in some collections, especially if it's put together by a subject matter expert in your organization, they might have very flowery language. They might go into great detail. And I think there's some interest and value in that. But you might also have very, simple, clear-cut captions and a very, neutral style. It's really dependent on how you want to approach it. And there's a lot of flexibility there. And it's really thinking about how to best describe the collection and who your audience is, right? To reach people and to really engage people that might not physically walk in your door of an archives or visit a reading room, but they're really interested in the stuff that you have. They might not have ever seen an archives or even know what an archives are, but they're really interested in your primary sources. So you want to follow those user interests. So the contextual information is important as the collections. So I think, and this is like a long-standing theory of mine that's based on no research that I've done, but purely from my experience. I think people are really interested in archival work, but they might not ever know an archivist or visit an archives, but they're really fascinated by kind of what happens behind the scenes. And like, it's like a new world to people. So I think having the contextual information of how the collection came about or what you had to do to digitize everything or make it accessible, I think that story is very interesting. You can also think about user interest regarding things like exhibitions, publications, lectures, tours, and programs. So now that you have your collections managed really well, how can you build upon it so you make things more approachable? People might not approach your collections purely, let's say, through a traditional finding aid. That might be alien to them, but they might be really engaged with it if they see an online publication or a brochure or a hard copy book that you've created. And so you need those capabilities of the collections management system just to make the creation of those deliverables that much more easier and faster. So you can do a lot of online presentation of collections in that context. So again, thinking about what are parts of your collection that are very interesting, that you can tell the story of, that people would be engaged with, people that maybe are non-traditional archival users. I think reaching out to those audiences are really important. And you have to think about when things are online, we're getting a larger, more geographically dispersed audiences. You're basically speaking to the world. So people that will never walk in your door, never look at a container of documents or your emulation of, digital files that you've had, they are still interested in what you have. They might not know it. You might not know that they're interested. So how can you create something to really draw people into your organization? I was thinking recently when I was putting together the slide deck of in a past position I had, I was a lone arranger, an archivist at an organization, and I wanted to put materials that are part of the archives on Instagram. And this was years ago. Instagram wasn't new. It was relatively new, but it had been around for quite a while. And there was a lot of resistance internally for whatever reason. The organization, the colleagues I worked with tended to be like that by default. They didn't like anything new. But I thought, let's reach out to new audiences. So the people that I was trying to reach out to, people that were interested in architecture, that might have never heard of this organization, where I thought they were and they proved to be was on Instagram at that time. So let's, put parts of the, I never said these are archival images. I just, would have these beautiful images. I would give a date, I'd give a location, I'd give a caption, and I put out this content daily. I think I would do 3 posts a day. It was a lot of work, but I could see immediately that people were really engaging in the content that I was producing. And I knew those types of people would never heard of the organization and would have never looked at the website of the organization, but they were engaging daily with this Instagram account, and they turned into donors of this nonprofit. So it was a really powerful way of seeing where the users were and then creating content for those users. Now, a lot of that content was already created. So it was, images that were already digitized as part of a digitization project that already had really good, robust captions. And some of it was pulled from documents we already created, like brochures and publications that we had. So I wasn't necessarily creating all new content. It was just repurposing the content that we already had, and it reached a tremendous amount of people. And so what was really kind of great about this, because there was a lot of naysayers, is that people would go to specific conferences that related to the organization, and people would know the organization through the Instagram account. They hadn't heard of the organization before, but they knew about it through Instagram. And even the website people, when we were going to redo the website, they said, you have a really good Instagram account and we want to include that in part of the website. And that was wonderful. It made me feel really good to hear that, because I did put a lot of work into it. So this is kind of, I went on a little bit of a tangent, but I did want to give an example of how to think more creatively with your archival materials, and to put a flyer out there, see what people will engage with, and think about repurposing your archival collections in a way that finds the user where they are. So there's, I think, kind of building upon that story, there's this freedom from traditional structures. Now, I should say, this is really dependent on, I think, you as an archivist, but also the organization that you work in. So if you are working in a very traditional archival institution, maybe there's a less freedom than, let's say, a more open type of organization. But I think there's always some freedom, some wiggle room between kind of traditional archival best practices and engaging with people. So again, I think there's new ways of interaction between users and archives. Again, thinking about creative ways that we can reach them using this foundation that we've set with our collection management system that runs efficiently, and thinking more about archives as an open container versus kind of the controller of information. So we're being a little bit more transparent about the work that we do. We're being more welcoming to users. But at the same time, we're not ceding our authority, because as archivists, I mean, again, we're not neutral. We're saving things for specific reasons, and those might be somewhat biased. They are biased, but we're not ceding our authority, saying, this is a totally open archives, anything goes. But we are saying, we engage with the public. We exist for users. We exist for giving researchers good customer service. That's the point of archives, is to be used. So I think there's, you should really consider the possibilities of being more open, having users have more freedom within your organization. So something to think about. You know, I always say, question everything if you can, to see how you can make things better. So web presentation, I think, is very powerful. So you allow users to discover things on their own, and they can pursue stories that most interest them. And that's usually done, I think, best with multimedia, not just text. So let's say you have a traditional like slideshow where people, you're giving a way that people can explore things by, image 1, image 2, image 3. You might think about, is there a way that we can display some of our content that's pulled from our collection management system in a way that allows people to discover things in a way that's more human? That's the kind of the way that the mind works, and have more in-depth discovery. Is that possible? It may or may not be based on your capabilities and your organization and the way that you think about things, but you have to think about, especially in the time that we're in now, there's limited people are limited in if they can go in reading rooms and search through a collection. So as a researcher, even if you're looking at one box of materials, like documents at a time, you're still kind of exploring things and almost like a mind map. Like you're not necessarily going through each piece of paper one after the other. You're exploring. So, that I think that kind of human interaction of exploring, especially with tactile things, I think that can't really be replicated perfectly in an online world, but we can certainly think about web presentations, like how can we make it more similar to that discovery process that someone would have in, let's say, a reading room. Um, Again, something to be creative about and to kind of push the boundaries of how you can make things accessible to people. So you might consider working with applications, so social media, apps that already exist, or things that you can build yourself. And these types of apps reach broader audiences. You can a lot of times use commercial services. And I always say start with collections that have already been digitized or born digital, because then you don't have to worry about actually having to digitize things as well. You can start out with stuff you already have. And so this is pretty wide open. So for example, I have a client right now that a lot of their materials are being presented on Flickr. And so Flickr, is a photo sharing site. It was popular quite a number of years ago, but there's still kind of a core group of people that use Flickr. And I think they're moving away from that system, but I think that application, worked pretty powerfully for the resources that they had at the time. So again, sometimes organizations have this conflict between the materials that they have that they want to keep on their website versus creating content that lives elsewhere. That's kind of an internal discussion within your organization. But I think it's helpful to think about reaching out to those audiences. Again, it's talking about my Instagram example where not everyone was interested or thought that was a good idea, but then it proved to be a way to reach people. But we had to give up some of that authority of only having our images on our website. So I think there's pros and cons to every approach. And mobile technology, I think, is an interesting factor too. So, you know, I make the assumption that everyone has PCs and laptops, but of course, not everyone does. Most people have smartphones or some type of capability. Certainly, people have more smartphones than a laptop or a PC. And a lot of times the way that people access information, no matter what they have, is through their smartphone. So how can we make our collections easier for people to find on uh, their cell phones? And it definitely differs, like the presentation of information differs on a smartphone than, let's say, a desktop or web application. A lot of times with mobile technology, people are concerned about, the material related to their current geographic location. So for example, I was thinking about like a walking tour. If you have materials or you've created some type of app or something that people can access in a smartphone, they might want to do a walking tour. So they need it like geographically in a certain area at a certain time, and they want that immediate access. And that's a way that they can engage with your collections at any time, and a way that brings the archives to them in a way that they get information. You have to think about, most people don't regularly visit archives, but they're always looking at their phones. They're always engaging with information practices that are at the tip of their fingertips. So how can we bring archives more easily to them? And I know that's kind of a big thing to think about, but I think it's important just to consider if there's ways that you can do that. So with technology, you might be able to build these apps or ways that people can access information. You might have the capability to build the project in-house, but probably more likely you might need assistance of technology or design companies to help you. And if you are building something, you want to involve user feedback as part of the design process. want to see how it actually, beyond just the archivists or the design people or the IT people, how are users going to use this technology? And it can provide a lot of good insight about the interface that people look at and the structure of information. And you're also building an audience for the application. So if you know that these are potential power users of this technology, you're getting this great feedback from the beginning that's built into the system. And it's going to make it more successful, and there's going to be more buy-in of it. And this is also an opportunity to leverage your collections management system by building partnerships. So thinking about, are there other institutions that maybe have similar collections or are in the same area, or they share something in common with you that you can partner with them on a particular project, especially anything that involves technology. So how can both of your organizations reach, kind of cross promote to your audiences? And building these partnerships also it helps share development time and cost, which is super important. And thinking kind of very broadly about how the collection management system will allow for more discoverable collections. I think this is especially important for organizations that have the same systems. So that makes it just so much easier. So if both organizations have the same systems and they maybe could feed more easily into this project that they're working on, it's that much more powerful. It's not like you have your own old system or an ad hoc way of doing things. You definitely sharing information, and in that instance, 1 + 1 might equal 2 and might also equal 4 because of something powerful that you're building together. So leveraging collection management systems is all about long-term viability, right? It's not just you install a system and you're good to go and I mean, I hope that you build upon it. I think you'd be surprised at the capabilities, especially if you've traditionally had a very laborious way of doing things because you've had old or antiquated systems or no systems at all. Once you have a powerful system in place, you can really, you don't have to concentrate on the day-to-day stuff as much as being strategic about your collections and how you can help users. So I think there's always ways to think about opportunities to maximize the investment that you have and to add value. So to add value for researchers, to add value for your organization, and to add value for your archives department. And of course, having collections management systems that can reach people really enhances scholarship and all different types of learning. That could be very academic learning, but also the recreational learning that we're used to. It can help teachers, it can help instructors and professors reach new people. It can help, people that are just hobbyists that are really passionate about a particular subject. I think you'll find that once you have a collections management system in place, you can really start to think about how you can really leverage the power of this system to really reach new audiences.
Thank you so much, Margot, for showing us how to make the most out of the collection management systems that we currently use. I specifically like the example you gave earlier, sharing your content through Instagram and later on draw donors in. That was amazing. And for people who may be in traditional organization, there's always room to get creative. So think about these topics and areas. Obviously, you can always share a story through information you can put together. And there's a lot to think about, even around how you present your information to engage with your audience. So let's leverage your collection management system for optimal benefits. Another area I think you should leverage on, by the way, is this book that is on screen right now, called Digital Preservation Without Tears. It is a great introductory book about digital preservation for you. And what you're going to get out of this is you will develop an awareness of digital preservation concepts, the ability to communicate issues around it, and the basis for further studies. You're also going to feel more confident about the digital preservation topics and an emerging best practice you will have to think about in the next few years. Again, it is such a pleasure to have you, Margot. And if you do would like to get more question or have any more questions for Margot or for us, please feel free to reach out to us. Her email is margot@margotnote.com, and her website is margotnote.com. And our email is sales@lucidia.com. And you can always go to our website, as mentioned earlier, for the recorded session. And thank you again. Until next time. Bye for now.